We're excited to do this with Fullbay, our really good friends and partners at Fullbay, to talk about something that I think everybody's feeling right now, which is both the parts and technician shortage. I know from our standpoint, we talk about the technician shortage a lot, and maybe the part shortage doesn't get enough attention at times. And we're going to talk about a really cool report that Fullbay put together, and really informative report that I think we can all learn from. So before we get started, I do want to touch on a couple of housekeeping notes. One, we, as always, encourage you to use the chat box to converse amongst yourselves. If you have a best practice or something that you've seen out in the industry, go ahead and put it in the chat. Talk with the other guests. It's what it's meant for. I think the more interactive the webinar, the better. So please use the chat and talk amongst each other. I think we're already seeing that kind of firing off as we speak. Which is really cool. If you do have questions for us, use the Q&A function down below. It's a little easier for us to see that because the chat gets so busy, right? So if you've got a question that's specific to the three of us, make sure you put it in the Q&A and we'll make sure that we get to it. And then lastly, as a reminder, all of our sessions are being recorded, and we'll email this out to everybody that registered after we complete the webinar so that you can watch it back. If there's something specifically that you wanted to kind of touch on or look at, I think there's a lot of numbers that Fullbay brings to the table here. You're able to do that there. Now, some introductions. I'll start with myself. I'm Jay Goninen. I am the co-founder and president of WrenchWay. And I'm happy to be joined by Jacob and Chris from Fullbay. Jacob and Chris, if you wouldn't mind introducing yourselves.
Sure. Jacob Findlay, co-founder, executive chairman of Fullbay.
And Chris O'Brien, chief operating officer.
And this isn't the first content that we've done with Fullbay. We've done a lot of different things with Fullbay. And this report that they put out each year is just honestly super exciting. So I'm really looking forward to being able to kind of dive into this a little bit. So just a quick overview of what the agenda is going to look like today. We are going to talk about the part shortage, and we're going to look at numbers specific to that guide, some really good information for all of you out there. And then not only look at the numbers, but look at ways that you can get past some of the part shortage issues that you're seeing right now. Some of it you kind of have to live with, but they give you some really good strategies and ways that you can kind of work around that and maybe make your lives a little bit easier. Then we'll talk about the technician shortage. It's something that we're obviously all very familiar with. It's definitely a pain point. And looking at the numbers that Fullbay found with regard to the technician shortage, what can we do to help you attract technicians to your shop? And I think there's a lot of principles through both of these things that aren't maybe necessarily Fullbay or WrenchWay specific, but that you can really use in a variety of different ways. And then we will put a little plug in for WrenchWay and Fullbay to tell you a little bit about what we do towards the end of the webinar. So without further ado, let's talk about this State of the Heavy Duty Repair Report. Guys, this was phenomenal. It's just so well written, and there's so much good information in it. How did you guys come up with the idea to do this in the first place?
Well, thank you, Jay, for your kind words. It kind of came to us as we built out our product and talked to thousands of shop owners and saw the issues they were dealing with. We discovered a lot of not only best practices that we could use and implement in building out our tool, but we also heard a lot of shops asking for data and best practices. So we learned just as much from them as maybe they did from us, probably more, about best practices, and that was super helpful. But as we've grown and scaled, we've gotten into this position where we have an incredible breadth of data and kind of a high level view of the industry. And our attitude has always been that the more we can help people, help the industry, whether we sell them software or not, we believe that it's not only the right thing to do, but it helps people trust you, right? So and we want to be trusted. So our philosophy has always been, to the extent possible, we want to share what we've learned. Our focus is just on building the best tools possible, but share what we've learned, share the data that we have that we can, anonymized. But that as we've grown, it's just become more and more of a thing that our customers asked for and others in the industries asked for. Basically, baseline metrics on efficiency, and we're going to talk about parts and that kind of thing. And we kind of stepped into a situation where nobody had really done this, and there's not a lot of kind of industry-wide thought leadership, I would say, at least in the commercial repair space. And what do you think, Chris? Does that sound about right?
Yeah, and I think folks were wanting tactical information where it wasn't just high level theoretical, but what is it? How does this apply to my region? What is happening in my area of the U.S. or Canada? And I think that's what we were able to shed a light on, and really help with some detailed specifics by region to help folks reconsider and reevaluate where they're at.
Well, and what I have to compliment your team on is how easy it is to read, right? So when you're going through it, it's visually stimulating. It's actually like, it's easy to comprehend the data that you're putting out there. And I think that's really important, because if you go read a lot of corporatized reports or anything that's out there, it can be, I don't know, for me anyways, my eyes can kind of glaze over and it can go over my head. This was not that way at all. This is really easy to read from the front to the back and really be able to comprehend that data. I can't compliment you guys enough on the way that it was laid out.
That's our amazing marketing team. There's a guy, Matt, Aaron, and a bunch of folks in the marketing team that did an amazing job putting this together.
Yeah, there's a real science behind the visual display of quantitative information, and also if it were me, doing the graphics and stuff, you would not have said that. Yep. We have a great team, really proud of it. And like I said, I mean, like you can see on the slides here, our customers on some level are okay with us using an anonymized analysis of the data. So we sampled 500 shops from the data set that had been with us, met certain parameters, been with us long enough that we could compare year-over-year data. And so forth. So that was super helpful to kind of get a kind of a quantifiable, quantitative view of what's going on here. And then, of course, we did surveys too.
Anything that you learned over the course of doing the study, or obviously there's a lot of data that we're able to pull out of it, but any surprises or anything that was unique to doing the report that maybe you didn't see in your day-to-days at Fullbay, or was it pretty straightforward in terms of being able to get response and that type of thing?
I think some of it was predictable, where the industry's been talking about the technician shortage, so supply chain issues. It was interesting to find out, though, that folks are outside of their network searching for parts more frequently than we thought. We thought maybe folks would be regionalized, doing final mile delivery stuff, partnered with their local vendor and really just leaning on them. And the reality is they're having to go outside and create new relationships, where I think that's where we kind of started focusing in on the Fullbay marketplace to help address some of that.
Yeah. And it was interesting, Jay, the first year that we did the quantitative analysis was 2019 to 2020, the year-over-year numbers there. And it just so happened that COVID hit in 2020. And that was pretty interesting for the first report to see the impact on shops overall and shops by region too, and by industry, because at least on the commercial repair side, it's not a monolith. So these shops are repairing equipment for various industries, and obviously they're located in various regions. And it was pretty interesting and surprising to see the different impact, whether regional or industry specific.
Yeah, talk about a time to the value in tracking data as we go through COVID and trying to learn more about the part shortages in general and the impact that it has. And we'll kind of dive into that piece now, because I do think it's really important to understand where everybody's at. And I believe we've got a poll question on, have you been impacted by the part shortage? I personally would be shocked if this wasn't a 100% yes. Oh, there's a no. All right, we've got some no's. We've got a lot of no's. Yeah. Well, I guess just the one no. Never mind, two no's. But pretty fascinating to see that. I think universally the shortage has had an impact on a lot of people, and it's certainly been a challenge. So let's talk through the numbers of what we saw when we dive into this, right? I think the quantitative data of what comes back to us and what we can decipher and maybe use as we lay out a strategy for trying to attack this. So as we look at these numbers, is there anything that sticks out to you guys that maybe you want to talk about in depth?
Well, I'm surprised the 82% number in there in the top left is so low. I mean, like we just saw in the polling question, right, Chris? I mean,
100%. Yeah.
There's got to be some exceptions. What are those exceptions?
Well, and I often wondered, is that somebody who's doing maybe some, preventative maintenance, and it's more oil change specific? They're not doing in-frame or heavy repair. If it's something that's pretty standard, and maybe, or
Swap
they
out
might
filters
have,
or something.
yeah. Or it could be, we have some folks that are, kind of tucked away in small markets where they are the distributor for several shops, not just for a region, and maybe they had more than enough inventory on hand that they were able to kind of weather the storm. So I imagine that there's probably a little bit of that.
At the same time, 82%, I mean, that's near universal impact. And or something that, I mean, COVID obviously precipitated the parts shortage, with the supply chain disruptions, but this isn't COVID. It's another blow, basically. So
Yeah.
although we knew it was coming, the 82% number is incredibly high given the fact we're, just kind of coming out of COVID.
Yeah, it's shocking that some people are saying it's bouncing back, and others are saying it's really not. It's just continuing on. Like, this is an issue that's going to be here for another year or more. Like, so, I mean, personally, I needed something very small. Like, you would think an oil pan. I need an oil pan that you could get any day of the week. Have it same day, next day, whatever. Drive to the parts store, can't find it. I actually called the OEM, and they said, unfortunately, that it's August before they'll get their next shipment in. I'm just blown away at basic parts like an oil pan or lifters. I need some lifters that are very common. Can't get them. So I know it's automotive, but still, it's really relative and shocking.
Yeah, I had heard a little bit about the rubber shortage as well too, and I think as you look at the amount of miles that maybe a truck puts on, or anything we're working on, right? Like there's so much concern in that regard, because how do you prepare for what the unknown is, right? Like I think that is such a scary piece for a shop to kind of grasp and get your hands around.
Yeah. Plus, we did a webinar on this a few weeks ago, actually, and one of our panelists mentioned he's a shop owner out of Texas, that it's not the parts you would expect, that we're seeing shortages. And 1 week it's a shortage, the next week it's not, and on the most random parts. So it's there might be specific things like rubber, but then random things like it's like the oil pan or whatever. So it's really hard to predict, and in that way, shops might be tempted to load up on a particular part when they can get it, but that one part may not be in shortage anymore, and you just blew a bunch of money on unnecessarily increasing inventory.
Yeah,
so.
Demand it's got to be very careful with evaluating demand and velocity. And then Jay, on rubber, I was shocked because naturally I thought, okay, well, the tire manufacturers are sitting on a ton of inventory. It's actually not the case. And there's really what's interesting is we were just talking to a manufacturer a few weeks ago, and there's a casing shortage. So you've got retreads that are a hot commodity because there's not new manufacturing going on, or there's delays in new manufacturing. So now there's rubber shortages where you're trying to, there's a ton of trailers, trucks on the drive side that are using recaps, and you'll run them out 5 years, et cetera. They're now having like an epic casing shortage. And so they're now trying to put strategies together to like rally up all these casings just to keep the supply chain running and the trucks on the road with the rubber shortage.
Crazy times. And you really, when you look at the, where we've gotten in the past 30 years, Chris is a Lean Six Sigma expert, Toyota manufacturing methodology and so forth has always been pushing us over the last few decades to run more lean and have just-in-time inventory. And there's a lot of benefits to that. But to the extent that our entire supply chain is running like that, one small disruption can just basically throws a wrench in the works, and you start getting these weird things, and who knows how long it's going to take to get the entire supply chain back to essentially the well-oiled machine status that it was before. And do we want to get back to that point, or are there changes that we need to make to the supply chain to prevent something like this from happening again? And what costs does that entail, and so forth? So,
Well, and what can you learn out of this, right? Like maybe there's ways that you can run more efficiently, but and maybe using some of those lean principles, but then also being able to cover your backside in case something like this happens again, right? I think there are opportunities to kind of look at this, and I can't help but look at that number seven, that 17% of shops reported extreme disruptions in their operation.
yep.
And my heart breaks for those people because they're telling the truth. Like that's having a real impact on their business and with stuff that they can't control, right? Like stuff that's out of their hands.
Yeah, it's hard enough to find technicians, and now you've got this parts issue.
Tying up a bay. Yeah, I think that one of the things people were realizing was, and might have got caught off guard, where now there's triage bays and different things, but you start tearing into something like it's no big deal and you'll get the parts, maybe it'll take a day or two, and those days are gone. You got to be very, very careful cracking open engines and going deep in certain types of repair, or plan on, I think in that last webinar, like literally planning for the worst case scenario, ensuring the parts are available, and then pulling it into your bay.
Which is hard because you don't always know
Right.
what parts you need till you get into it. Tough one.
It is. And I'm curious, and just kind of picking your brain on this, but one of the things that I always did when managing a parts inventory is you're looking at parts turns, and you're looking at, it says 44% of shops reported only having 25% of parts needed for a repair in inventory. And I would be fascinated to look at their turns numbers and see what their inventory turn looks like now as compared to 2019, pre-COVID days, because it has to have some level of effect, and maybe in a super negative way where your turns are extremely high. Or, I'm curious as to maybe if you've got any insight on parts turns or the impact, or if it's just so scattered that maybe it's all over the board. I'm almost fascinated with how this lack of availability has impacted maybe parts turns or other KPIs that you're looking at in a parts department.
Well, I think one of the things that most people might not be aware of is, sophisticated, most of the shops don't have a robust inventory system in place, and don't use terms like cycle counts or inventory turns, right? Like, so we're coming from industries where you might have worked at a dealership, or your father owned a shop, and you've learned some business techniques, but not all the shops. There's a vast majority of these independent repair shops that are 5 or less technicians, and there is no infrastructure. So I think part of what's happening here is that you might have held on to oil and filters and basic things, and some of the mid-market shops or the larger dealership level shops might have been doing a better job on the inventory side, but I think it's really hurting a larger group than we actually believe is out there.
And we support that. So now I'm talking about the Fullbay tool, the shop management tool. So, our customers are running inventory turn reports to figure out what changes they need to make to their mins and maxes in inventory. And that's something that we'll definitely take a close look at, and including in next year's report on an anonymized basis, because you're right. I mean, that from a best practice, Jay, you're talking, you just do your turn analysis to figure out what you need to stock up more on, right? And that can help head off a lot of this 25% issue. Not that you want to have 100 to get to 100%, because that takes an incredible amount of working capital, and it's 15 to 20% a year in carrying costs to keep inventory, whether it's obsolescence, storage, so on and so forth. So it's this balance you have to strike. But to the extent that you can fill those gaps on parts that you really did need in inventory and didn't have, the turn report helps a lot.
Yeah, now more than ever, just doing basic blocking and tackling. This is inventory 101. If anyone's done any type of inventory, this is inventory 101. You count your parts, you count your negatives daily. Why do you have negatives? That means your inventory is off. And then you start really, unpacking those velocities, and you destock what isn't moving, and you start purchasing and stocking things that are moving at a reasonable clip for your store. But yeah, a lot of folks, that's advanced stuff in this industry. I would speculate, when we pull the data, probably less than 30, maybe 20% of the shops are even utilizing the tools that are available to them at their fingertips. I mean, that's probably gracious right there, but it's probably the 18% that is left over out of the 82 that's actually doing it that didn't have the problem.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's just so important for those of you that are listening out there to use those tools, because it gives you an idea of what you're dealing with and might calm some of that anxiety if you're able to kind of follow trends and be able to see those quick moving parts, so you know that you've got the right inventory on the shelves. I know it drives a great deal of anxiety because, like Jacob said, inventory is money, and that's the way I always looked at it, was looking at a part shelf and saying, okay, there's $20, there's $50, and it's just sitting there. And the more that collects dust, the less that's doing for your business. And it's such a for me anyways, it was always a pretty big anxiety driver. You always get nervous looking at that, and the amount of parts that just don't get used because they're ordered incorrectly or not returned when they should have been is, from a management standpoint, that can drive you nuts.
Yeah, even rotating. I was at a shop and they ordered a new fifth wheel, which, I mean, that's a big ticket item. They ordered a new one for the truck in the bay and left the one on the shelf. And I said, how many times have you done that? And they said, well, it's caught us a couple of times. And I said, how so? Well, they no longer sold that type of fifth wheel. It was outdated. They had done it so much that they inherited a fifth wheel that they had to liquidate. So, like, you want to also rotate your stuff, right? Don't buy in new, shortcut the rotation, especially with anything that's made out of rubber. You definitely want to get that off the shelf and rotate this stuff in and out, not take shortcuts.
Yeah, and at the risk of stating the obvious, and I don't want to insult people's intelligence, but the rule of thumb is you start the year with $100 worth of inventory. On average, that $100 will be worth $80 by the end of that year because of shrinkage, obsolescence, damage, carrying costs, all of that stuff.
Yeah, and we were just talking about this yesterday in another team meeting. I haven't ran into a shop, no matter how large they are, that isn't losing about $1,000 a month at minimum in inventory. And some people are like, well, that's not true. It's impossible. But I can tell you, like, when I grew up, and I from the 80s and 90s, I didn't, all my plumbing got done. The truck showed up and had tons of inventory. I never paid for it. The cable guy was a good friend. That truck was full of stuff. The repair guy, all the shop supplies, I never paid for shop supplies. I could buy a starter and get all my fluids changed and installed by somebody with a service truck.
People yeah.
Yeah, and somebody paid for that. Some shop owner paid for that. No, I don't think that that's changed. I think that those trucks are still out there, even though, I lived that in the 80s and 90s. I think that's still happening, and we just don't know it.
And regular inventory counts is a good countermeasure to that. And as a former auditor, I started my career as an auditor and doing financial fraud cases and so forth. And number one rule of fraud prevention is to don't tempt people, don't make it easy. So regular inventory counts and people knowing that this is happening and that you're watching and so forth is an incredible deterrent to that kind of thing. And that goes right to the bottom line. It's pure profit.
Yeah.
Any shrinkage you prevent is pure profit.
Yeah, you have a statement, Jay, where if you lose $1,000 in profit, you have to go sell, depending on your margins.
Yeah, if it's $1,000 worth of parts a month, and you're running your shop on, say, a 10% net, right? You don't have to do $1,000 worth of work to make up for that. You have to do $10,000 worth of work to make up for those
losses.
Parts. Yeah, exactly. So when you think about that, and that's how we would think about it in the fraud world, when the costs are actually astronomical, and the prevention measures you put in place and inventory counts can be annoying and so forth, but they're so cheap and easy to do when you put it in perspective.
Yeah.
Anyway.
No, it's great insight. And I think all of this comes down to proactively managing your inventory, because that, if you're not doing that, it's really, in some cases, a lost cause. Lost money, lost, more pain, increased pain. And I do have a question that came through our Q&A that I'd like to ask. And it said, with COVID causing Shanghai to shut down again, how bad do you think the impact will really put our industry in terms of like putting it back into a standstill, or maybe back to like the shutdown COVID days?
I I would love to know the answer to that myself. I have no idea.
I
Do you
know
know,
that's
Chris?
no. There's a lot of buzz about shifting part sources, part origins, right? Where the made in China to made in Taiwan to made in Indonesia. I'm sure there's continuing to see the supply chain
And
shift,
onshoring of parts,
right?
3D printing, CNC milling onshore
Yeah.
to replace some of the hard to find stuff.
I think some local people are starting to do it. I know it's a little bit more expensive. There's no tax incentives to create jobs in the States unless you're a mega corporation. The tax incentives continue to be offshore. So I think that ultimately we're going to continue to see those move around. But I couldn't predict it other than it's going to be a pretty good run, and reevaluating some of the folks that used to rebuild starters or rewind alternators. I mean, are those things that we should consider reevaluating instead of just purchasing and replacing every single time, and sending the core back, because I think the core is more valuable than ever these days, and most of them can be rebuilt. We've just lost our way with buying a new part is easier.
Yeah, and there's this trick that a lot of shops are onto, which is if you can manufacture the part yourself for the same cost as sourcing it for the customer, the shop is actually more profitable because you're not giving away that margin to the part supplier. There's this saying in a period of inflation, or maybe we have a spike like lumber prices or whatever, and that is that the solution to high prices is high prices, because it attracts more people into the market. And so I think you can apply that to shortages and price increases and so forth on the part supply chain side, where I think we're going to see more domestic or nearshore manufacturing to solve some of the what a nightmare it is to get a container across the Pacific Ocean right now, right? So I think the market is responding to that, and I think we're going to see more nearshore manufacturing of parts, especially the harder to find parts. And it's a bit of a wake up call that we're so dependent on a global supply chain for at least some certain critical infrastructure parts. I mean, just think about the chip shortage, right? So we're so dependent on this chip that's manufactured overseas. And I've heard people in the semiconductor industry talking about that. Can we bring that back on shore so we're not faced with the same issue? And so I think that the thing in Shanghai, the lockdown there and other lockdowns that may or may not spread, I think just underscores the same and may exacerbate the same issues that we've been faced with. And I think the great thing about the free market is it tends to self-correct. And I think we'll see some really creative people and creative things take place.
I do too. And I think to kind of summarize everything here, it's obviously a pain point, right? There's I think the numbers say that that most people are having at least some form of an issue with part shortages. And so let's maybe take a look at ways that shops can combat this, right? What are some different opportunities for us to not only survive it, but maybe thrive throughout the part shortage? And I think there are opportunities to competitively stand out in these cases. So can you guys walk us through a little bit of maybe some opportunity or some ways to battle this part shortage issue that we're having?
Absolutely, we're all over this. Go for it, Chris.
Well, we constantly preach reevaluate your pricing strategy and your pricing structure, right? And a lot of times we find there's probably somebody on this webinar right now where you're processing bolts that cost $1 and you're still adding 20%. And to just run it through your facility, it costs you more than the 20 cents to just run it through your facility to procure it, store it, place it, etc. And I think that just reevaluating, how do you have your price matrices set up? The idea of, the 1980s process of, it's parts plus 20%, and that standard thing that's been around for decades, that just it doesn't work in this environment. And in general, most thriving businesses are reevaluating those matrices where they kind of, they're inflated on the lower end parts, and then they taper off, and you work your way down to a 20 or a 30% as the part gets more expensive.
So in other words, it's a $1 bolt. So you want to have a graduated price matrix.
Right.
So that $1 bolt has got to be marked up at least 100%, but
Minimum.
but you're not going to mark up $1,000 part 100%. So as the price of the part increases, the markup percentage decreases, and that's a super common sense thing you can put in place today that immediately will benefit and is completely ethical, totally accepted. But a lot of shops don't do it because maybe they don't think about it, and it's easy. It's an easy change to make.
Yeah. And then if you're already doing it and you're like, oh, we already done it, like that's, hey, Chris, Jacob, that's so 10 years ago. Then when was the last time you looked at it and adjusted those by a point, add a percent on that one of those tiers, or modify your tiers and change your brackets where they're too wide. Maybe it's between 50 and 100 is an entire bracket. Maybe that needs to be broken into 3 brackets. And there's 3 levels between $50 and 100, or 100 and 300. So it's really just refining how your matrix is laid out. Your customers won't feel that, whether it's $1 or $2 here or there on these parts versus just, you bought a part one day and the next day it's $40 more. You definitely want to try to avoid that unless it's just part of, the supply chain issue.
Yeah, and consider having a different scale in place depending on the part type or the vendor, or maybe even the customer. Maybe you have different customer pricing levels. Retail, wholesale, whatever, preferred. And that's something, at least on the commercial side of things, is really a good best practice to set up, because you want to have customers that you're really close with, for whom you're, tracking preventive maintenance and doing a lot of recurring work. Maybe they get, your standard pricing, but if it's a walk-in customer and so forth, you increase the parts markup for them, and probably the labor rate too. I think we'll talk about that in a minute. And that gives you an opportunity to, offer a fair exchange of value to them in exchange for you getting more work, more recurring work from them. You can then offer the standard labor rate and the standard parts pricing scale, which you should still evaluate and make sure is solid. So, and do it with confidence. I mean, we live mostly in the commercial repair world, and the fleets that rely on our customers, the shops, need these shops to thrive and to be in business. They need them. And too many shops, I think, feel like they need to be the martyr, or they're not a good guy if they don't charge what they should be charging. So do it with confidence. Don't rip people off. Be ethical. But what we're talking about here is a completely reasonable and I believe is a fair exchange of value for what you're offering the market. It's hard to run one of these shops, to assemble the techs. You need to be charging enough to thrive as a business.
I couldn't agree more with that piece too, because that something that I'm very passionate about is making sure that shops get their labor rates in check and make sure that they're, from the service end, that they're in line, because technicians' wages are increasing. And I think in order to remain competitive with the benefits and the salaries that a lot of technicians are commanding, you're going to have to drive profit, and you're going to have to figure out ways that you can run a true business. And the name of the game in a business is to generate profit. So if you need those good quality people, you're going to have to generate profit in a number of different ways. Having an adequate parts matrix is non-negotiable. It's very, very important.
Even shop supplies. A lot of times, there's so many things happening in a shop where, a can of brake clean. I've seen brake jobs where they'll just run through 2 cans. It's like, are you charging for that? Because that stuff's like that's not $1 a can anymore. It's not $2 a can. It's definitely more. And some people say, well, my customers won't pay for shop supplies. Well, then you are, right? Like, so you're going to pay
out of your profit,
right? Out of your profit.
Yep.
Yeah. And depending on how big your shop is, your consumables are probably, $2,000 a month, conservatively. So you've got to get that back, and you have to pass it through. We typically, years ago it was 5 to 8%. We've even seen shops go as high as 10%. I think you got to be careful with that. Know your market, but if you're at 0, gradually move that up, even if it's 2.5%, and try to work your way somewhere between 5 and 8 on your shop supplies. And it should be shop supplies against labor. Every hour your tech works, that's a fair assessment. Some people do parts and labor. Gets a little bit aggressive when you're doing parts and labor, especially if you're just doing counter sales. Charging shop supplies on counter sales probably isn't reasonable, especially if they're carry out. But that's another way to kind of help control and deal with costs. And then, we've got this bullet point up here with relationships. We often see, sometimes we're a product of our customers. So I imagine these shops are dealing with people who are broke down and or are fairly aggressive. And when it's not perfect, there's a lot of yelling and shouting and whatnot. I think just recognizing that doing that to your vendor is probably not a good idea, especially now.
No.
So I mean, right. So, but we've seen it. We've
It's a give
seen
and take.
it.
It's like it's like a friendship, right?
Right.
You gotta
And
keep it healthy.
yeah, your vendor's probably going to make some mistakes. I mean, everybody's human. I mean, it's if we continuously make mistakes and we don't get better, that's one thing, and you have to change relationships. But if you treat your vendors with respect and you're working together in a partnership, you don't have to necessarily have all your eggs in one basket with one vendor. You can have other vendors. Just make sure that those relationships are healthy, and you're not walking all over the vendor every time they make a mistake. Because I think that inherently, we're seeing where that's having an impact on decisions that are made behind the scenes, right? When you're the most difficult customer to work with, or you're unwilling to pay for 90 days or 120, you would never run your business that way. They shouldn't have to either. So I think that those are important things to consider when you're in this environment or any environment.
And you're
the
the
key-
first one to, go ahead, Jay.
Well, I think the key word that you said there is truly viewing them as a partner, right? Not maybe not putting that vendor tag on them, because they are truly, at the end of the day, especially when we get in a tough situation like this, that's when you need true partners. And I think that's a great point, Chris.
Yeah. I mean, if you think about the way any business thrives is by having the way you do business is through win or no deal. You got to have a strong relationship there,
Like
and
that.
one party should never be taking advantage of the other. That fair exchange of value is totally valid. So anyway, and you can see the rest of the bullets here. I know we're a little short on time. So purchase at a surplus to the extent that your inventory turn report dictates it, right, Chris?
Yeah.
Be very careful. Don't go out and break the bank on buying a bunch of parts, because as we talked about, they're a severely depreciating asset to have sitting on your shelves. And if you're not charging for diag, I think we'll talk about the tech shortage here.
Yeah.
But during your diagnostic process, to the extent possible, get the parts ordered and assembled. And by the way, before the repair. And by the way, the higher level of, I guess, customer intimacy or tight relationship with your customers, the better you're going to get to know their units and what parts you do need to have sourced. Whereas if you're just dealing with random people coming through the door, you have just an incredibly larger possible, I guess, universe of parts that you may have to get. And so having tight relationships with customers, you track their PMs, so on and so forth, pretty much their units are the only ones you ever see, makes it a lot easier to think through what parts you're going to need, in the next 60 to 90 days, and do this thing, making sure that you've got parts available ready to do that PM or that light repair or the scheduled service or whatever. So
Yeah, parts people are heroes, because they to be able to look into the future and trying to predict the future, especially in the environment we're in right now, that's an unenviable task. There's a lot going on there. So, and that's a great segue to the technician shortage. It's something that we've talked about a lot, and we just want to throw a quick poll out there. Was it easier or more difficult to find techs in 2021? And we'll be curious to kind of see what comes of it here. Looks like it's pretty consistently more difficult already. We do have a one person saying it's easier.
that person on right now.
Yeah, exactly. Flip your camera on. We're going to talk to you. But again, I think it's one of those almost rhetorical questions where you kind of know the answer ahead of time, right? It's gotten significantly harder. I think it's going to continue to get harder, especially as we're struggling to get people into the industry. Now, I do think we're making headway there. We're getting better. But when we look at the numbers in terms of survey numbers, how shops are finding technicians, still word of mouth is by far one of the highest all the time. I still think it's personally the most effective way of finding a technician. I do think the way that we get word of mouth has changed, right? In really a lot of it being social driven. And that's something we promote a lot with our clients, is getting your teams to share the word for you, share the message for you. But at the end of the day, taking word from somebody you know, like, and trust is probably different than taking it from a company, right? Like having somebody out there that can speak to their experience about what it's like to work for you and your shop goes a lot further than if one of the three of us were to say it, doesn't it?
Yeah,
Yeah.
it goes the other way too. You're more likely to succeed with an employee who was referred to you because the person who referred, their name is kind of on the line. And so, they're going to think through that person's weaknesses and so forth and decide whether they're going to put their name on the line by referring them. So yeah, it's really solid. And I would imagine that the retention number for referrals is higher than for job boards for that reason.
Yeah. And one thing we've noticed with job boards, I think it caused a shift in our business in general, was that they've gotten drastically less effective over the last few years. And I think it's just because of the shortage. You go to any city and you type in diesel technician, and the flood of jobs that comes rolling out, it's really hard to decipher and overwhelming for a technician to even understand what opportunities are out there, because you can't spend an entire week going through the thousands of jobs that are out there. You kind of got to cut through all the BS to get to the stuff that you care about. And if you're looking to make a move as a technician, you care about a lot of those other things, obviously money being a key piece, but there's a lot of other variables like that training, like the tooling and the way the facility looks, all of that other stuff that goes into it. And that was a big piece of what we did on the WrenchWay side, was trying to visualize that or make it visually stimulating for a technician, and also incorporating that word of mouth, right? I think that's so important to have people talk positively about your place of business. And really, I don't see that going anywhere for a long time. And we'll talk through just a couple of different opportunities or ways that you can really get after technicians. And we use this slide in other content that we've done, but there is no silver bullet. At the end of the day, there's just not enough people to fill all of the roles that are out there. And that causes you to have to try and sell to a technician. Why is your shop different? Why am I going to pick up my really, really heavy toolbox and move it to another business? And if you don't know that from a shop's perspective, if you don't know why you're different, and one of my pet peeves, I say it consistently, is when I see a job ad out there and they say free uniforms in it. That's an expectation now. That's not a that's not a job perk, right? Like that's something that a good technician is going to expect. So if that's your way of differentiating yourself, you're in trouble. It's going to be harder for you to find technicians. But when we look at this, the reason why it's more difficult, and we talked about the shortage and that there's not enough people, it kind of means that all technicians are employed or they already have jobs. And one of the things that's great about this little pie chart that we have here is that 20% have no interest in leaving where they're at. They're perfectly happy. And I think for us as an industry, we need to grow that part, right? We need to have shops that have better offerings, that have more attractive workplaces, because at the end of the day, I know we like to glorify that it's becoming more electronics driven, but there's still a lot of techs that get dirty, right? Like there's still techs that are getting oil on them. And even though the electrification is coming, there's some unsexy parts of this business that are going to drive people away. So what are opportunities to grow that piece of the pie? When we look at it, it's getting those people into good shops.
Yeah, there's nothing unsexy about this business.
It's all sexy.
Sorry.
No, that's great. That's great. But it really is like when we look at that 5%, always looking, in some cases probably the perpetual job hopper. They're cruising job boards. They're just looking at whatever the next place is that will take them. But really, we see that big piece of the pie, which is 75%, that maybe are content but not happy. Right? They're not blown away by their job. They're going in to get a paycheck and maybe nothing else. And as an industry, we make it really, really difficult for them to evaluate their options. And that's something that I think for those shops that are out there that truly understand why they're unique and why they're different, being able to really go after that 75% is a big opportunity in industry. I'm curious if you guys see that as well. Do you see, when you're working with a shop, maybe a technician that's there just to punch the clock and get their paycheck?
Absolutely. I mean, this is
There's always a batch. There's always a batch. What we're starting to see now is the days of the shop owner yelling at employees is starting to fade away. They're still out there.
throwing chairs as a means of motivation.
Yeah, we've seen it all. And I think one of the other things too is, like even just last night I was using some foul language. I love to use it every now and again, especially when you hit your knuckles on something. But I think that we're at a point now where it's getting extremely disrespectful to like be at work and it just being, your boss or the owners talking to you and you can't even have your kids stop by. And I think that, cleaning up that, that persona that we have out there and and it's not all of the shop owners, just some that, are just operating like, they just, not realizing that they're influential and they're leading their teams and people are looking up to them. So I think, that evolution of where the shops are evaluating how they talk to their employees, how they conduct themselves at business, and then really trying to just do the simple stuff. Like I heard someone said, yeah, we do a barbecue once a quarter. Well, that means 3 months went by before you said thank you. If that's your only thank you, like what did you do last week? What did you do this week? There should be something or somebody in your shop that got an attaboy or a pat on the back every week, not just, we only think about it on that one quarter and then it's painful to do because, then I have to worry about everybody working while we're all barbecuing. But,
I think, I think what you're alluding to is something that I talk to technicians a lot about too, is just as an industry, let's push ourselves forward to some level of professionalism, right? I don't think you would go into, and Jacob, when you began your career as a CPA, I'm guessing your manager probably didn't have the same mentality that a lot of shop owners have or a lot of shop managers do, in terms of
You'd be surprised.
Yeah. Well, and you're right.
But yeah, I see what you mean. I think just across the board in Western society, the expectation of professionalism is going up, because there's more transparency to what goes on and viral videos, whatever. But I think you have to be able to fire people, right? You don't want to hire anybody you're not willing to fire. So I'm not saying that you should get people past that point, but you get to know your employees and their families, their kids' names, their spouse, and so forth, and actually care. Pay them market. There's the rule of thumb is that for every $1 an hour you pay your techs more, you need to increase your labor rates by $2 an hour, and that's okay, and it's expected right now. So jack up the pay, do what you need to do, and increase your labor rate that you're billing to your customers. That's fundamental, especially we're in 8+% inflation. You're going to lose people if you don't do it. So tackle it. It's a great environment to tackle it right now, and give them a clean bathroom, a private space, to put like a locker to put their stuff, and donuts or nothing, to buy every other day or every day, whatever. Just make it a place where people want to be. Yes. I'm not saying that you have to coddle people, but treat people with respect and professionalism and care, and you'll flip the 20 to an 80. I mean, right now, 80-20. That's typical ratio out there. It's
right there.
Right? The Pareto principle. Pareto principle.
Flip it on its head. And I think you'd be surprised how long that goes. And you're still gonna have to fire people. You still lose people. But I think the bet is pretty solid that you will fire less. You'll have higher retention, and you'll find more people through word of mouth referral.
I agree. And I like one thing to add there. That's something I talk about with technicians a lot, is raising the level of professionalism from the technician standpoint too, because all of the stuff that they desire is on the other end of them becoming more professional, more professional appealing, or more visually professional, if that makes sense. But if you want the respect, you want the pay, you want all of that, act like a professional. Like, we go out to some of these, the Facebook groups, and you watch what some of the technicians, how they talk. I've been in shops all my life. I know they talk like that in a shop, and being able to clean that up a little bit and represent yourself in a way that a shop is proud to put you out in front of a customer. I think that's when a lot of these pieces that they desire start to come together. So I don't put this all on just the shops themselves either. I feel like the technicians need to come to the table and bring a different level of professionalism. When you see a really truly professional technician, they stand out. They stand out for a reason, because not everybody's that way. And the more people we can get like that, the more of everything else that we desire I believe, at the other end of, including asking for a higher labor rate. When they see that professional that's in a restaurant, and instead of being all greasy and grimy, they're professional looking, it might change the perception of what that outsider sees our profession as. And again, something that I'm really passionate about, because I do think that's something that helps us move forward as an industry.
100%. And Chris, you're saying, as an owner, set the example.
Well, yeah. I mean, Jay, everything you're saying, you're one person. We got thousands of these owners out there who can be the mentor.
Yeah.
And I think that's what's missing, is folks are looking. Someone needs to take that step, run into the fire, and take that step forward, and just start assisting the direction that you're going and what you're educating techs on. Everyone needs a mentor, and some of us just have never had that, right? And so you've got a bunch of folks in a captive audience, with the shop, and they need somebody to look up to.
And hey, it's a free market. If you don't do it, the guy across the street will.
Exactly.
100%. And that's, when we look at strategies for finding these folks, I think it all starts with that professionalism from the shop, being able to create that culture that people want to come to, including the people that are already there. So I always say that the best recruiting strategy starts with a good retention strategy. Make sure you keep the people in-house that you already have. But when you are out there looking for techs, one of the common mistakes that we see is everybody puts all their eggs in one basket. They're trying to just throw it on Indeed and hope for the best, right? I always call it post and pray. They're just posting out there and hoping that they drum up a bunch of techs. And, it's almost, if you look at this, it's almost in order of, they'll post on a job board. That didn't work. They gave it a week. It didn't work. Take it down. Hey, you know what? We have a Facebook page. Let's try that. So then they'll try that. That doesn't work after a week. Then you go to, well, maybe my techs know some people. I'll ask them. And so then you start asking around and trying to drum up interest that way, and maybe slowly starting to generate interest. And we didn't hire anybody. You know what? We've always wanted to grow our own. So then you go to the school and start talking to the school. What we really promote is all of those things are needed. You have to do all of those things, and you have to be good at all of those things and be proactive, because what commonly happens is, oh no, our A-Tech just had a back injury and is going to be out for a couple months. What do we do? And it puts you in a really, really bad spot. And that's where maybe you make some of those desperation hires that don't result in the kind of person you want in the shop, or don't create the culture that you want in the shop. So being able to put together a program that is constantly hitting on these things, and not just doing it with the ask, right? Don't just go out there and say, we're hiring. Put content out there that really enables you to show off your brand. And that's where we put a huge focus on employer marketing. Why are you a great place to work at? Are you actually a good place to work at? And get other people to tell the story for you. The people that work in there, I know technicians, and a lot of them are very skeptical of what your advertising says. So if you can get people to honestly talk about their experience, again, it goes back to the people that you know, like, and trust. Are those people telling, is their message similar to what your message is? And being able to have your finger on the pulse of employer marketing is incredibly important of moving forward, with even being able to use a job board, being able to really accurately portray that. So does that part make sense?
Yeah, and Jay, I would add a fifth bullet as another possible approach. We recently acquired Dieselmatic, which does marketing and so forth. have
Great
a good
company.
website for your shop, and any good website has a clear call to action. Somebody can click a button and do the thing you want them to do. So obviously you want to have a service request call to action on your website to people request service, but you need a second one, which is basically come work for us.
Yeah.
Right. Those two clear calls to action, and make it easy for people, like you said, to find you. And you're going to get more into the funnel that way, more prospects. So
Yeah.
Yeah, in a lot of cases, that's really, really challenging for a tech. And something that we do on the WrenchWay side that we feel is great is getting the information out there to allow a technician to do their due diligence and be able to see what the shop is all about. And granted, you don't have to use WrenchWay to do this. You can do this in a number of different ways. We really do believe in that, getting video content out.
Yeah.
Yes. Get video content out there too. I can't emphasize that enough. But again,
TikTok, Jeff?
we do. Yeah. Our WrenchWay marketing team does a phenomenal job on TikTok. If those of you out there that are on TikTok, go check them out.
Awesome.
Yeah. But yes, lastly, just take full advantage of the video and social media aspect of things. Create content. You can see here, video content on social media gets 1,200% more shares than text and image do. And we've seen that. I mean, we've seen when people put out good content, good video content, it really is just drastically more effective. And especially with technicians wanting to hear what it's like to work there. They want to hear from the people that are already there. We always hear, shop owners talk about, oh, if I just got them in the doors, I could talk them into working here. Well, here's your opportunity to get them in the doors without even actually physically having them in. So I think it goes without being said, but it is super important. Create content about your brand. Make sure you know what your brand is and why you're unique. And then create a ton of content around it. Get comfortable in front of a video camera because this stuff isn't going away. Video is going to be crucial as we move forward. It really, really vital to attracting people to your business. Now, lastly, quick plug for WrenchWay. Our mission truly is to help solve the technician shortage, and not even just the technician shortage, but just make the industry a better place, right? We want to make it better for technicians, better for shops. And really, I feel like we've built the ecosystem around that with our top shops pages, reverse job posting, the app for technicians that really, really works well. School Connect, get involved with your schools, build your own pipelines, and really be there for the schools when they need stuff. Don't just always go in asking for stuff. Give them value, and you'll see that in return. Our WrenchWay Insiders app and top schools, where schools really are able to kind of do the same thing that we do on the Top Shop side, sell themselves to students, and really trying to get them into your programs. And then I'll let you guys talk about Fullbay here for a minute.
Yeah, Fullbay, it's a platform for running a repair shop. We focus on the commercial side, but it works everywhere. So service requests all the way through to invoicing, dropping the invoice into QuickBooks, and everything in between. We automate that process and protect the owner. And you got to have a modern solution, whether it's us or somebody else in this day and age. And it's been very effective, very well received in the market. So we're excited to keep working on this. Yeah,
it's an excellent product, excellent website, by the way. If you head out to fullbay.com, lots of information out there.
Yeah, thanks, Jay.
Yeah, and lastly, I think we've got one question to answer. We were kind of up against the time there, but let's just look at this question quick. An anonymous attendee said, "You talked about shop supplies and increasing the margin on a $1 bolt. Are you talking about charging for both? Would the $1 bolt or washer be included in the shop supplies based on labor?"
Oh, interesting. Well, it depends on the shop and the market and what your consumables are. We see a lot of folks itemizing some of those parts that are like $1 bolts. They're not calling that shop supplies. If you're calling that shop supplies, you're probably 10, 15% on shop supplies if you're giving away nuts, bolts, washers, and some of those other types of consumables. So now more than ever, reevaluate your strategy, because that stuff ain't free. And also look at the P&L. Are you capturing all those expenses from Fastenal or whomever that's stocking those bins? Because that could easily be $2,000 or $3,000 a month. And then the brass bin, I mean, heck, that stuff would walk off all the time.
Yeah.
Brass is not cheap, especially now. That should be itemized.
Yeah, I would say you want to itemize as much as possible, and think of shop supplies as things like zip ties, shop towels, things that are being used during the repair process
Break clean.
that you never would necessarily break out separately. You're still justified in charging a 6-8% of labor shop supplies fee, even when you're itemizing something like a $1 bolt.
Yeah, and if you're getting into penny stuff like 1 penny washers, if you're getting into really small stuff, I could see where you're going to hit some sort of threshold or some break point where it's just too hard to manage. So use your judgment. You know what you're consuming, and then whatever you're including in it, just make sure that shop supply addresses and covers that. At the end of the day, you should make money on it, not trade money on that P&L line.
Yeah. And I love the comment here from from John Shoemaker. If a part goes on a car and leaves with the car, it is a part. I like that. That's a good philosophy, John. All right, last question. Does Fullbay work with Sage 100 for CSV file transfer or just QuickBooks?
It's tightly integrated with QuickBooks. If you use Sage, you'd have to take an export, a CSV file from us. You can export your invoices, and then you'd import those into Sage, which we have some folks that do that.
All right. And I think that's all the questions we have. So, gentlemen, thank you so much for joining me. This was, it's always a pleasure to talk with you guys, but this was fun, very interactive. I really enjoyed it. So thank you for joining us for this webinar, and for all of you participants out there, thank you so much for joining us. Hope you got some value out of it. And again, thanks to Fullbay for being such a great partner of ours, and just a good business in general.
Yeah. Thanks, Jay. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Take care.